After a deputation is completed, members shall each have one opportunity to make a preamble statement and to ask questions to the deputant or deputants, or have staff or staff for clarification purposes only and without debate. Resident regarding the survey vote process for speed bumps. So welcome, Dan, and you have 10 minutes.
Thank you very much. Dan Anderson, and I'm just going to put something here to help me with my timing a bit. I'd like to thank you all for the work that you do on the committee, the volunteers and the councillors, and I think your role is very important. In fact, I have a greater impression of the need for your role. I'm going to quickly go through an overview of what I'd like to discuss with the committee, and we'll get used to this process again. Okie doke. The intro, the need for some protection here for the residents in terms of the current traffic calming structure. And this is focusing on the role of the Road Safety Committee, and I'll come back to this later, about why it's important given the context of the council and gas tax agreements, things like that. And this is just focusing on the importance to this committee of the consensus of the community on speed bump decisions. This is a problem with regards to how the views of the residents on two streets were misrepresented back in September 26th. We'll come back to this. This highlights Michael Maddock, and especially his comment that he sees the consensus of the community is a primary concern to him. It's a primary consideration, and I hope that's true for the entire committee and that you can use your role to act upon that. This gives an example of problem streets, if you will, in various wards. And the middle column shows various recommendations that could address those problems, and then the source of the information and so on. And that'll be addressed through this presentation. These slides here identify 11 recommendations that actually I hope this committee will pass motions, whether it's subcommittees involved or whatever, that because your role, as I understand it, is as an advisory committee. That's the way Councillor Dasko has described that in the recruiting of people for this. Even though the website tends to give the impression that you're a marketing arm of the road safety people, but the advisory role is very important, I think. And we'll come back to these items specifically. Now, this, make sure I didn't miss any key points here. This is providing proof that the program structure was hiding and continues to hide information in multiple ways. And that's where the recommendations primarily address things. This is what happened in 2021. The high chart, the high bar there, the start, was when residents received the surveys from the city. They didn't realize that information was being hidden from them. The intent, Karen Raz had gas tax money to spend. Her intent was to put 30 speed bumps in Park Royal, another dozen on Aura Road, and as it turns out, another dozen on Queen Street West. But the residents didn't know that, especially not Queen Street West. The bar that drops down at the far side is when a resident distributed flyers to the residents telling them what the intent was and that there was an intention to put in 30 speed bumps. And it completely changed things. What's notable is the people that voted the first time in the first week, this is yes versus no votes, they were not able to change their votes, even when they had information. The structure just wasn't there for them to do it. So there was a significant effect with the residents. So that's a key thing here, is trying to deal with this non-information or misinformation. And it affects not just Park Royal, not just other areas in Ward 2, but everywhere. And there's comments to that effect. Now this is Councillor Mullen, who came in when Karen Raz just quit. I mean, she was pressed to explain why this information was being hidden, and within 2 weeks she quit, and it gets into the other controversies you know about. But Councillor Mullen came in, and her comments are quite appropriate. She acknowledges that many did not receive the survey, and that tends to be a typical thing that happens. And also those that did receive it weren't really informed about what was being proposed. And her recommendation, extremely appropriately, was that there be a revote and the residents have options. Now, the problem we've run into is a councillor who has come on board that has a different approach. I call it a bad approach. What he is demonstrating is an intent to disregard the views of residents and, as he says, to impose traffic calming, which is defined as speed bumps in effect. It doesn't include other things. And the definition of speed bumps, of traffic calming, is very important because it tends to get misrepresented and it discredits residents when it's done. Now, this is an example of Councillor Tejo imposing speed bumps. On the right is what could be a reasonable compromise option. It was never exposed to people. They were never informed about it. On the left is what the councillor and the commissioner did. And the commissioner said 70% of residents support this. The problem is, I've talked to 62 of the 84 homes that front on that street, and none of them knew anything about a survey vote about the number of speed bumps. Now, there may be two exceptions in there where they were kind of vague in their responses, so they may know something that others don't know. So an important part of the recommendations includes your support for the commissioner. There's been a request to road safety in writing, October 23rd or so, for documentation about how this 70% is justified. This is getting into the 70% and details the statements there. This is the requests that have been made, and hopefully you will support this. This is number 9 and number 10 in the recommendations. Orr Road is a case where there was a problem, but it was resolved, partly because the residents here, I believe, have more influence with Councillor Tejo. But this provides good insights on the nature of the issue. Now, this is what's happening in Bromsgrove. We got a revote, and the top is the compromise option, and the bottom is what Commissioner Wright wanted to do, and Councillor Tejo. So that what they did is they fundamentally misrepresented the results of the voting, and I've provided you with separate documentation that explains that. The chart on the left explains how the vote results came in based upon the data from the Commissioner. And if you study this, you'll be amazed that they took the position that 56% of people supported putting in 10 speed bumps. I feel that's a dishonest thing to communicate to Council. In the same way, I thought it was a dishonest thing to say that 70% of residents supported 12 speed bumps on Queen Street West. But you can do something about that. This gets into the assertions of the 56% and some details. There's a playlist of videos that gives you background of Councillor Tejo saying he wants to impose speed bumps on people. Now, this is Councillor Picca-DeMerla acknowledging some of the problems. And she's basically saying the surveys present a false narrative and that the councillor should be following a much stricter way of interpreting the results. The problem is you get into the gas tax agreement where council is neutralized. The council cannot oppose what the councillor wants to do, is my understanding. And you're addressing that. I think that's recommendation number 11. Now, this gets into the problem with the gas tax stuff. What Commissioner Wright is doing here is saying, whoa, wait a minute, guys. We don't decide what to do. It's council. The problem is council doesn't do it. It's the councillor that decides because council can't oppose him. Mayor Crombie supports the commissioner, and she was supporting, if you look at the March 22nd meeting, she's supporting the misrepresentations by the commissioner and the councillor, in my view. And what she states is she says, of course our commissioner is an expert in this area, and they do what they think is best for the safety and security of the community. So you have this survey process that's being misrepresented, and you have the mayor saying, well, the commissioner gets to decide what he wants to do anyway. I just think that's fundamentally wrong. And what makes it worse is the structure of the traffic calming process hides the information. Definition of traffic calming. There needs to be a clear distinction between traffic calming.
Mr. Anderson, you have 1 minute left.
Thank you. This gets into views of the residents. These are my closing comments. Now, three controversial issues. The role of I've talked about the gas tax to some extent, so I won't dwell on that. The second one is the code of conduct and the mandate. It basically says that you guys here, fairly enough, you cannot falsely or maliciously criticize staff. And by staff, I mean the Commissioner. No criticism of Colin and his staff is intended here. The Commissioner is the architect of what's going on. And I don't think the committee members, though, can close their eyes to the fact that there is a fundamental dishonesty in the structure of what's being communicated. And finally, it says that the committee members here represent the community. So I was surprised to get communication from the city clerk, last comment, that states volunteers are not to be communicated with directly by members of the public. I find that a strange scenario, and that might be clarified. Thank you very much. Oh, a subcommittee. I'd be happy to work with the subcommittee to help implement these recommendations.
Right, thank you, Mr. Anderson, and thank you for your generous offer. I just wanted to make one thing clear, and that's with regards to the role of the committee. The marketing component, that's a subcommittee. I just wanted to make mention of that.
Thank you.
So that's just for some clarity. And anybody with anything on Mr. Anderson's deputation?
I'll receive the deputation, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Councillor McFadden would like to receive the deputation. All in favor of receiving the deputation? All right. Deputations shall be received in the manner and the matter shall be referred to staff for a report unless there is a resolution or recommendation passed to receive the deputation.